Great. Thank you to our four great speakers there to kind of set the stage. Now we're going to go into a novel type of session, which is, I mentioned in my earlier remarks, to try to look at innovation maybe from more the viewpoint of the eye care delivery system and how it fits in, how commercial products could succeed and fail, and even how the eye care delivery system itself could change, as it did for adoption of anti-VEGFs, to allow the innovations to move faster. And the no-brainer speaker for this is Reggie Sanders, who I met when we were residents together at Wills Eye Hospital. He was chief resident, and he went on predictably to have an amazing career being ex-president of the ASRS, but more importantly, building the largest retina practice in the world, the Retina Group of Washington, that has really scaled up to a level and integrated innovations along the way. And I think there'll be some good lessons learned from Reggie and from the amazing panel that he's put together. So I'm going to turn it over to Reggie, and we're looking forward to your remarks. And we can have our panel come up as well. I'm going to exit.
Yes. Thank you, Gil, for the kind introduction to have the panel come up. Everybody have a seat. I'd also like to thank the organizers for having our panel be up here today. During the COVID crisis, there were severe work shortages. This affected medical practices, the service industry, and these issues persisted even after the pandemic resolved. I think mostly the pandemic exposed that people wanted to work from home to some degree. Our practice, close to 40 retinal specialists in the DC area, was no exceptions, and we had severe employee turnover. In fact, it was particular with our medical technicians, and especially with our in-room technicians or scribes. Our scribes worked in the room with us, and they were responsible for inputting the patient counter into our electronic medical record system. So our in-room scribes allow us to efficiently see patients without having to interact with the computer. Well, after the pandemic, our turnover rate for these in-room scribes is over 60%. So we were desperate. Our CEO had an idea that, I wonder if these scribes that work in a room can work remotely, perhaps at home. So we did a pilot, and to our surprise, it worked. And in fact, it was easy technology. It was a Zoom meeting where the scribe was working from their home. It could be in California, New York, not necessarily the DC area. They had a screen where they were inputting data on the screen in the room where I was examining patients. I had an earbud so I can speak to the scribe and speak with the back in-house technicians who were responsible for loading the rooms. And it was as if the scribe were in the room. It was also low cost. It was also opened up the employment opportunities so that we didn't have to hire just technicians and scribes locally. We can go from across the country. And the most amazing thing was our turnover rate went from 60% to less than 5%. Despite this superior technology, there was a huge barrier that we had to overcome. So before I go over that barrier, I'd like to talk first about how technology has revolutionized healthcare. It's been a revolution. It improves patient outcomes, has it streamlined processes, has it reduced cost. So a barrier to adoption of superior technology actually means a barrier to advancing healthcare. So I'm going to talk about, briefly, categories of barriers, which are like pieces of the puzzle. And to solve the puzzle, we have to identify the barriers and figure out how to overcome these barriers. Businesses, families, ophthalmologists, we all have barriers, but they're unique for each group. And I'm going to talk about those barriers that are specific for ophthalmology. First, unclear clinical benefit. There are examples of cool technology but there's no real reason to use it yet. This picture is a distorted picture of the retina, which is generated by artificial intelligence. There are many examples of technologies that have a clear immediate need. As a retinal specialist, as ophthalmologist, we had the need to visualize retinal cross-sections to treat diseases such as macular degeneration and diabetic retinopathy. And this has been an invaluable office tool that we use that has changed how we see patients with retinal diseases. Next category is barriers or technical limitations. With retinal diseases, we needed to clearly see the diseases in a reliable and sensitive fashion. The early OCT was a great revolution, but it was only till later on, with the spectral domain OCT, that we were able to really sensitively see diseases and advance our treatment of this category. Regulatory hurdles. In the US, the FDA is responsible for making sure that whatever device, product, medication is safe for patients to use, and it does what you say it's going to do. There's an evolving framework for digital technologies. So the key steps are to engage the FDA early, to understand their classification so you can then devise strategies and resources to do clinical trials. Financial barriers, that's a big barrier. It's not infrequent that there are upfront substantial investments with new technology with uncertain returns on investments. And often the physician reimbursement doesn't match the technology. Disrupting established practices. Ophthalmologists, cardiologists, business people, families, we don't have time. So we have to really understand how technology impacts the workflow. Don't underestimate the role of staff, and make sure that the reimbursement must justify workflow. For the next category, remember I was talking about the barrier of having, we had a barrier in our practice of having in-room scribes working remotely. What was that barrier? It's called human nature. Cultural resistance. No one likes change. So we had hesitancy due to fear of the change and having scribes there in the room work from home. And there was a question raised about whether it would work. It's compounded back the fact that we were busy and we didn't have training for this. And not so much with this, but with any technology, there's always concern about, is there erosion of physician-patient responsibility, or relationship, excuse me. So what's the bottom line? Better patient care. In the end, that's the only reason we do this. Any new technology needs to achieve this benchmark. It's not possible till you identify all the different barriers and work to solve them. So let's do a case study. I talked earlier about OCT that was in the office. There's a company, Notal, that has devised superior technology that allows to do the OCT, patients to do OCT at home. They can actually monitor diseases in between their visits to their ophthalmologist. Then what happens using artificial intelligence, there's analysis sent to the physicians to determine a personalized course for the patient's care. So does home OCT solve all the pieces of the puzzle I talked about earlier? Let's see. First of all, is there an unclear unmet need? Is there a clear unmet need? I think so. Home OCT allows us to analyze real-world outcomes, allows to personalize treatment intervals, and potentially reduce office visit burden. Is it reliable? Well, the study shows that there's a very high adherence to the use of the home OCT for patients. Patients like the technology, and the artificial intelligence image analysis has been very reliable. Regulatory. There have been 2 large studies that show that home OCT is safe and it does what it says it's going to do. And in fact, home OCT in 2024 received FDA approval. How about cost? Well, there's more uncertainty here. As physicians, we write a prescription for the home OCT, but what's unknown is the cost of the physician and staff work. Fortunately, the payment code for home OCT is different and distinct from the payment code from the in-office OCT. And the company is currently working on nationwide coverage and payment rates. Disruption to workflow, that's another uncertainty. How's it going to affect physician scheduling, where the OCT is only done in the office and now a portion will be done by patients at their home? How about staff training? Possible solutions including centralized monitoring, making sure that the integration with the crucial integration that with the EMR system is done. And then also, we're not unique in ophthalmology. There are other medical specialties that have remote monitoring, so we can take clues from that. The big one always is cultural resistance. Physicians, people, are fearful of change, the impact clinically and financially. There will be staff resistance, so we got to identify that and overcome that staff barrier. And then look at and examine the effects of relationship with patients. Patients will now have some of their monitoring done at home, and how is that going to affect my relationship with my patients? So the bottom line with home OCT is a better patient care? Yes, I think so, and the potential is enormous. There's an unmet clinical need. There's reliable technologies approved by FDA. What's not as well known is the financial impact, the effect on workflow, and cultural resistance. All right, so next we have an elite panel of people who are going to help guide us through talking about the barriers of technology. So let me introduce them in alphabetical order. We have David Eichenbaum. David is considered one of the leading innovators and entrepreneurs in ophthalmology. David is a partner and director of research in Retinal Vitreous Associates, which is in Southwest Florida. David, we know that you have some issues with the weather, and we appreciate you being here. Mike Jumper, current president of the American Society of Retinal Specialists and leader of the Retinal World. Mike is a partner of West Coast Retina in San Francisco. Kathy McCabe. Kathy's also from Southwest Florida, so Kathy, thanks for being here. I know you've been affected by the weather. Kathy is a world-renowned cataract and refractive surgeon and is an active leader of Eye Health America and ASQUIS. Erin Powers. Erin Powers is the Vice President of Sales and Marketing from Johnson & Johnson Surgical Division and is a longtime ophthalmic industry professional and consultant. Lejla Vajzovic. Did I get it? Lejla, at a young age, is a full professor at Duke University and is considered one of the leading retinal surgeons and educators in the world. And last but not least, Charlie Wykoff. Charlie is a leader in research with the Retina Consultants in Texas, the Retina Consultants of America, which is the largest conglomeration of retinal specialists in the world. And Charlie is one of our premier clinical researchers and clinicians in ophthalmology. So let's get started. And we want this to be a free-flowing session so you can help us. So please, everyone, chime in when it can. David, we're going to start with you. David, what advice can you give a drug or equipment company to anticipate and mitigate barriers to success? And can you give examples?
Thank you, Reg, and thanks to Eyecelerator for having me with this esteemed panel of friends and colleagues. So the best advice I could give a company looking to commercialize a product to anticipate and mitigate the barriers which you eloquently put out in your presentation is to listen to the prescribers, listen to your consultants, listen to your customers. The customers will show you the way. If you have a product which seems wonderful internally and you bring it out to the community and the community has a place for it or has resistance for it or has incredible enthusiasm for it, follow that lead. Try not to push back against that or redirect that, because it's going to require the organic adoption of the community to be one of the incredible commercial successes we heard about earlier this morning, or one of the future commercial successes which may be coming.
Any other thoughts? Charlie, how do you do that? How does, David said you should interact with listen to your prescribers. How do you do that?
Yeah, I think talk to as many people as you can. I think I've seen a lot of companies steer wrong because they have their core group of advisors that they listen to, and they're super well informed and insightful and very useful, but they miss a bigger picture. Talk to as many people as you can. Meetings like this are great. AAO, ASRS, go to as many meetings you can and just talk to people on the street, what it's like and what they truly need. Make sure you're addressing a true unmet need for patients.
Can I make a comment on that too, Reg?
Yes.
I think that, to me, I see this as an education of collaboration, right? Really two great points here is that, industry is educating surgeons on this new technology and application, but surgeons are also educating industry on actual application and adoption. And I think that that's what it comes down to, Charlie. What you said too is making sure, if you saw that chart that Gil put up earlier about crossing the chasm, well, the behaviors and practice patterns on of the surgeons on the left-hand side are very different than that early majority and late majority. So you really need a good cross-section to understand how to actually do that and what the success is going to look like beyond the key opinion leaders that you might be preliminarily speaking with.
Yeah, I want to add on to that I think what I see that's done that's very smart is a board or an advisory group put together that's the champions, the people who are doing it very successfully. The people who adopted it and then let it go are no longer using the technology, and the no, I never want to use this people. And if you get all of those people in the room together, I think that's where you really find out how your product is being implemented and how you can overcome the barriers.
I think you can't forget the people around you, so the workflow, nicely illustrating in presentation. While the surgeon may love the product, if my staff is not loving it, let me tell you, that product is not going to make it as well. So I think you really need to, a cross picture from thinking the surgeons to clinicians to where exactly the need is, but also really everybody that surrounds that environment, involving that in that decision making.
I had this one of my written questions here, but it brings it to mind. When there's new technology, is the burden for identifying that barrier, is it on industry or us or both? What are your thoughts about that, Mike?
I think it's an important collaboration. There are a lot of times, it seems to me, that industry comes to us with an incredible product, yet there are kind of the big barriers, say, where are we going to find the OR time to use this? How is it that we can get paid in a buy and bill model and an ASC for a certain, expensive product that we need to put in? These are things that I think we need to work together with, and it requires sometimes working with big societies to get regulatory things fixed. And so, but it does require a big picture looking at, in my opinion.
Shared advocacy, right, for those regulatory adoptions or those reimbursements. And Reg, I think, Mike, I just want to comment on that, in terms of the question of who does it start with? It sounds like a little bit of a chicken or an egg, right? And a really good example that I constantly hear, and granted this is more on the anterior side, is can't you give me a diagnostic that's all in one, right? Smaller offices, hard to make room, expensive, in which case, I hear that as an absolute need from surgeons, but then on the industry side, the question becomes, well, how expensive is it going to be? What's your willingness to pay, number one? And number two, we can't let perfect be the enemy of good enough. So I could make you the most amazing diagnostic that's all in one, but it's going to cost you $1 million.
All right.
And the barriers, I think you ask a great question. When and who identifies the barriers? And I believe that the barriers will become very self-evident rapidly after commercialization. As a participator in a startup and as an early adopter, I feel that the things that come up as problems early remain problems. Don't ignore the early signals if you launch anything commercially, whether it's a service or a diagnostic or a therapeutic, and there's some early pushback. There's a saying when you're selling something that your first offer is your best offer often, and I think that's true with barriers as well. I think your first barriers may remain your biggest barriers going forward.
That's an excellent point. Change a little bit. Kathy, can you give us examples? And by the way, these barriers is not, the title says in the retinal space, but actually is in, I think it applies to ophthalmology space, life. Kathy, can you give us examples in the anterior segment world of processes that help reduce barriers to technology adoption?
Yeah, so I think we've been hitting on a lot of those things already, and I think that, life is more complicated. I see that with my colleagues and patients. Everybody wants an easy button. Really, they want simplicity and immediacy. Like if you have something that's simple and the effect is reliable and immediate, that is a winner. So I think what we really should be doing is looking with the end in sight. Like start with the end in mind. who is the end user? I mean, generally it's the patient. We don't often poll patients to see what do they want? Where are the needs in the patient population? I think we need to start there to begin with. And then physicians, and then our staff, we mentioned this already, how are our staff going to integrate this technology? What's the flow going to look like? What's the space requirement? What's the time requirement? What's the education and training requirement? All of those pieces, if any of those pieces are not simple, straightforward, and immediate, that's where you fall down. And so you really have to think with those parts in the very, very beginning, because sometimes I'm asked to look at new technology somewhere in the development process, and it's really cool, and it is an unmet need, maybe, and the technology and engineering is amazing, but then there's some part of it that it doesn't fit in my hand because I have a smaller hand, or I can't see in the ocular, or I can't, there's so many little things that are just, the interface is not intuitive, and my staff can't figure it out, or it takes 10 steps to get the thing to start to turn on and be able to use it. So there's so many little things that I think if we started with engineers getting together with the end users and even the patient, for the patient experience, we could actually streamline that process and have a much better product in the end. And like you said, sometimes good enough has to be good enough to get something out there, but then the very early period is where you have to be willing to make changes that get over those small barriers that are early signals, like you said, because there can be something that in the end is the Achilles heel for your technology, and you didn't actually solve that problem early on.
And just to add on that, for example, OCT is a great example. You showed stratus images, which very well I recall was painfully hard to obtain those for a patient. And you're looking at a very low resolution image. But I think the introduction of OCT technology came at a peak when we were looking at anti-VEGF drugs as well. And those coupling with really drug options made that technology really skyrocket. And the need was clearly there. But even though introduction was rough around the edges, I think it's really the coupling with other options is what made it really big in our field.
So that's a good point. So I agree with you, Lejla, that the OCT and the anti-VEGF started at the same time. So even though there might have been a barrier if OCT was introduced separately, that barrier is lowered by the fact that it's such a need to have these anti-VEGF drugs. Mike, you're about to say something.
I just wanted to point out this barrier having to do with the technology adaptation in the clinic. When I started, and a lot of us on this panel started, a photographer for a retina practice was almost an artist. I mean, this is somebody that had to develop film, and wasn't really sure what they were taking as they were shooting the pictures. And so we relied on their expertise, which was very defined, to be able to do this. Now we have people who are doing photography, doing OCT. A vast majority of the time is spent with OCT, but we've lost that kind of artistry, and therefore we have to have an easy button when we're doing the photography part of our work. And so I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind is we have high turnover of staff, and it has to be extremely easy to do these imaging and device use modalities within our clinics.
Erin, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Just I wanted to say again about the easy thing. So it also has to be easy on the output. So an example might be iTrace. iTrace early on had such great information, really high detail and very complex to understand. And really, the output was difficult to understand if you weren't, really diving deep into it. And they have simplified the output, and now it's a great device. But that took a long time before that was changed to be a usable technology for the average physician even. And now it actually is easy for the patient to understand as well. So it's gone through a very big transformation and made it a very important tool to have.
You want to say something? Lejla.
Yeah, I was going to kind of couple that OCTA technology. I love the technology, but initially when it was introduced in my clinic, it meant for me to step out of my clinic to review it on a machine. I mean, that's definitely not going to happen in a busy clinic. But, technology is evolving. There's a great need, but I think that introduction was a little not quite pristine to make the workflow easier for us to use it.
Can anyone think of an example of technology that had barriers, but they weren't addressed, but the barriers went away over time? Does that happen?
Well, I think a great example is, at least in my career, which I think parallels more or less Charlie's, and maybe I'm a little older than Lejla, I think, but I remember with the Rufab injections, it was a process to do intravitreal injections. When I was a resident and we were doing Rufab studies, it would be gowning and gloving and draping and all this. And now, you do 30, 50, 60 intraocular injections a day, and that barrier has dissipated because we just got better at it. The clinical utility of the intravitreal injections was so high, combined with an economic story which was so positive to the space, that we mitigated all those early barriers. I remember when a Rufab injection took an hour when I was a resident.
Excellent point. Erin, what are some of the industry-related considerations that would impair commercial success, regardless of underlying technology?
Yeah, so when I think about what does commercial success mean, it's really partnership. It's making sure that the end user, kind of what we've talked about, understands how to use the technology appropriately, and it also means that industry is serving our customers, the surgeons, appropriately. And so, it's funny because I've seen over the duration of my career, what is great technology actually end up not being commercially successful. And something as simple as, let's say that a company is anterior focused and they want to go into retina. Those are two very different markets, two very different needs. There could be a huge barrier to adoption there just because relationships aren't there, practice patterns aren't understood, et cetera. The same can be said for if you are a medical device company and you want to get into pharmaceuticals. Again, two very different things. I have to reflect on my time at Alcon when Novartis acquired Alcon and really tried to turn the tide. Now, Alcon's gotten back from that, right? But there was a lot of commercial unrest and anxiety based on simply leadership happening internally that had nothing to do with the innovation. So I have to say that this is a lot of, I keep on coming back to education, right? Where industry has to be educated by surgeons, by our customers, by our administrators, to your point, on how do we best serve you. And industry, therefore, also has to educate surgeons and develop those relationships to make sure that that commercial adoption is successful.
Question for you, Erin. So how soon in a process if I'm a company and I have a product I think is going to work, when do I start thinking about barriers?
Oh, day one, day -1, right? I mean, I think that the second that you start thinking about innovation, you have to start questioning, do I have the right people in the room to help develop answers or even develop the questions for the unknown unknowns? Because otherwise, those little bumps that you were talking about, David, become huge hurdles and they're not going to go away. There's very few times that I've seen technology be able to smooth out those hurdles, and that comes with something like OCT, where it was such a requirement based on the other technology in the marketplace that we were forced to reverse engineer. It's a heck of a lot easier to engineer with information going forward.
Mike.
Yeah, Reg, one of the things that Erin just mentioned had to be like, who is the customer? Okay, and this is something that I know is near and dear to your heart. You've been a big leader in this with the ASRS, and that has to do with who is the customer of these pharma companies who are giving us these wonderful drugs that we inject in people's eyes. And I think it's important to realize and recognize that and address the issues by those customers who are the surgeons or the ophthalmologists and the retina specialists. And that came about when we were looking at recognizing who's doing these treatments. And so instead of at the bottom of an ad or at the end of an ad for a pharmaceutical injection, it's not necessarily see your doctor. It's not necessarily see your eye doctor. In our case, most of the time it's see your retina specialist. And I think that this is a very important thing that you all can do to recognize who your customer is and address, say, the content going into the advertisement, which is actually a big deal because that really comes back to us a lot after after a sporting event that everybody watches the next day, we hear a lot about the content of those advertisements.
Making sure that that education, as simple as that sounds from an industry, that your voice is heard. And so the direction or the call to action on that patient-facing material is fully aligned with the end provider, right?
Very articulate panel here. Charlie, how do safety concerns for new therapeutics create barriers for adoption, new agents in ophthalmology? You have probably more experience than any of us here with this.
Right, safety is a big topic. You know, I think we as a field, retina in particular, but certainly anterior segment as well, and glaucoma, have been acutely aware of safety issues more so over the last 5 years than ever before. And so I think keeping that front and center in your development program from day one is super important. And we saw, some of the classic examples here, I just give three briefly, are brolucizumab. Brolucizumab, probably the best drying agent we've ever seen. And early on, looking back retrospectively, there were safety signals. And yet the program continued, and it's a good drug with a clear safety problem. And that's why it's not used very frequently in the US. And so how do you change that? I don't know, other than just being aware of it earlier on and making sure we're making an informed decision. I think the second one is the surgical port delivery system implant by Genentech. That has been revolutionary in so many ways. Most importantly to me, it proved that long-term extended release biologics is possible in the human eye, which is a huge step forward. And they had significant surgical challenges along the way, most of which they have addressed beautifully by iterating over time on the procedure and the device itself. So they have done a good job adapting to challenges. And the last one that's still playing out in the space is gene therapy. Early on in the gene therapy discussions, we saw some inflammation, and truthfully, we kind of ignored it because we didn't know what to expect. We didn't know what would happen. Now we've come full circle and do not ignore any inflammation in any gene therapy, and we're very aggressive treating it. But we've learned a lot along the way, and those companies have done a good job of seeing safety challenges early that would completely prevent widespread clinical adoption and adapting to them in trials to make it palatable to the end user.
And to kind of tie together what you just said, Charlie, with what Erin said too, something we hear a lot about when we're speaking to companies or advising companies is how much safety will the customer, the doctor, tolerate? How much will we tolerate? And in retina, will we tolerate any? Because we have these great drugs. We have ranibizumab, we have aflibercept, we have faricimab, we have high-dose HD that are exquisitely safe and economically viable, economically favorable. So will we really tolerate anything to move the field to a new technology? And I'm not sure what the answer to that question is.
Yeah, it's a great question. It really depends on the patient and the disease state. So you're right. In wet AMD, DME, the bar is incredibly high. You'd have to have some new value add if there's any difference in safety. But other diseases, like let's take geographic atrophy. We have two excellent drugs. I'm a big believer in anti-complement therapy, but hopefully they're just a first step. They're not incredibly good drugs from a patient perspective. And so we need better things there, and both of them have delivery challenges, frequent injections, and also safety challenges based on their phase 3 data. So we need better drugs there, and the safety bar there is different, I would say, than wet AMD.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we would probably accept some more exchange of safety for efficacy with a huge high unmet need, like an IRD. I think we were speaking earlier that untreatable IRD, there'd be the acceptance of more, or GA, especially if we see tremendous clinical utility, there'd be acceptance of more than another AMD drug.
I love this conversation, and what I'm hearing is how do we minimize the risk, maximize the reward, right? There's trade-offs, but there's efficacy products that are just wonderful out there. The only thing that I'd add from an industry side is how important it is to be able to be working with surgeons, with specialists who can help identify that, right? Because what we don't want is to launch a product and then realize retroactively again, oh, there's safety concerns that we haven't fully identified and therefore been able to educate the general population. So we're always going to be pushing forward to create, new innovations, et cetera, but the partnership that happens early on when any sort of safety profile is in question is probably some of the most important relationship and collaboration time to have.
Yeah, I mean, this safety issue also plays out in anterior segment things, just to bring it back there as well. because certainly something we think about with MIGS, you know, safety versus efficacy, safety being the primary concern to begin with. If you don't have that, we can't worry about the efficacy part. Also presbyopia drops, you know, that was an issue, not identifying maybe patient populations well or knowing the risks may have played a role in that rollout as well. And then we look at side effects with premium IOLs. And so, you know, we know that we get great results and outcomes, but looking at the side effects is a big part of it, and not identifying those or knowing exactly which patients will have minimization of that has been a barrier sometimes to rolling out technology as well.
And we've gotten better. One last comment on this. We've gotten better as partners with industry, and industry's gotten better as partners with clinicians at putting safety issues front and center, mitigating them early, to your point. You know, if we go back to the brolucizumab story, which you talked about, it wasn't nearly as well played out as how we're addressing the safety issues with dry AMD, with GA drugs at IOI, or with port delivery system, and we're publishing on endophthalmitis. We're talking about the surgical technique. We're looking at real world data. As a field, we've gotten a lot better at talking about safety.
Yeah, and to couple that, I think it's really how you presented identification, but communication, and identifying those at risk, educating, like Erin has said, how to potentially mitigate those. I think this is the partnership really that has to be very transparent early on.
Excellent. Next question is for Lejla, Mike, and you, Kathy. All of you have crafted brilliant careers in the operating room. What barriers have you experienced or you anticipate, and reasons why, and the thoughts how to reduce these barriers? I'll start with you, Lejla.
Yeah, so I'd mentioned it a little bit earlier. I think that when we are on boots on the ground in operating rooms, you know, these great technologies are sometimes very difficult to incorporate. A couple of examples would be, you know, say a new heads-up display viewing system. Well, first of all, we are then going a lot of times to a hospital or to a surgery center and asking for money that they don't want to give us for a technology that they think is only minimally improving on what we have already. We've got a good microscope already. So this is a tough sell that we have to help make to surgery centers and hospitals. And then on top of that, this whole idea of the kind of potential for having gene therapies and very expensive therapies, which we are going to be delivering in either outpatient hospital setting or in surgery centers, where we have to then somehow get that drug to that place. There's going to be, at least now, we have a buy and bill sort of system for getting these drugs to people. And I think that those are two huge barriers that we are looking at, just the costs that we have to help try to incur from a third party, and this whole issue with getting drugs, and then that volume that we might be seeing if we are going to be doing some sort of intraocular surgery for a drug treatment that could be very high volume.
Well spoken. Lejla, your thoughts?
Yeah. But to add to Mike's comments, I think, and Reg, as you beautifully pointed out, first, unmet need. Is there a need? Clinical application for technology. So I'll use intraop OCT as an example. At Duke, we've been developing it for over a decade, and I truly believe in technology. Just like OCT in clinic, we can see more in the OR with the technology. But introduction was rough. Why? Because the technology is not very well developed. It's low resolution, and it's really hard to use in the operating room. So all of those factors play a role in utilization. And I find that, yes, we don't use the intraop OCT technology as well as we could potentially. I think other barriers is really introducing large equipment into the OR space, like Mike was mentioning. Really identifying the workflow in the OR it's challenging. If we are not having the space for it, we might not use it for that reason as well. So,
also adding, the other point is the finances, the cost of this equipment, cost of the medications that will be used in the operating room. We have to that's a huge barrier, and who pays the cost for all these different things? Kathy, your thoughts?
Yeah, and cost becomes a big issue too, even as there's more consolidation. I'm part of a private equity group as well, and so, you know, we want to bring new technology on. Maybe we know that it increases our accuracy and outcomes, but how do we justify doing that? And so then I think it is important for us to partner and collaborate to come up with the data that helps to show increased efficiency. You know, maybe there's better throughput, maybe there's better outcomes that we can measure, and you know, that allows us to do better negotiation when we're looking at payers. So we have to look a little bit down the road and collaborate. And then the second thing is, I would say, advocacy. You know, in the MIGS path, advocacy to make sure that we get or continue to have reimbursement that's reasonable to be able to offer a wide variety of MIGS procedures to our patients has really come down to making sure that we are an active and loud voice for the ability to continue to have payments and to offer those to our patients. So you can't just sit on the sidelines. You have to be an active participant.
I think the last piece is reimbursement. We have all this amazing technology to help us see things better, but are we getting paid for it at the end? Can we really utilize that to get reimbursed for it? So.
I see Mike jumping.
Well, there's, I think the times when industry and the medical field work best is when we're working together in a positive way for the patients. And for our example, my hat of the ASRS, when we're helping work with industry to put together white papers on topics, to do real research, to have the industry help us to get that research completed so that we can have real data to go to payers to help us with these reimbursement and advocacy issues. So I think the ASRS in the field of retina has been a leader in that, thanks to the leadership of Reg and others. So,
Charlie.
Yes, some of those comments made me think that the regulatory endpoints are also super important to keep in mind early on, and to work as a field to develop new regulatory endpoints. We have good endpoints in diabetic retinopathy, DME, wet AMD, GA, but I think all of us as practitioners see the value in slowing progression of GA lesions, just to dive into the details for a second, and yet that's not really manifest in the clinical trials that we have to date. And to invest as a field to better define those, right? All of us think that these perilesional analysis is probably where it needs to go, but we need real funding and real high-quality prospective trials to get there. And a great example is the Mary Tyler Moore Initiative in diabetic retinopathy, which has been funded by many of the companies here today to try to better explore new endpoints that are reflective of patients' experiences in diabetic retinopathy. And we need similar initiatives across other disease states like AMD.
Like AMD, but also even just cataract surgery, right? If you look at endpoints and the value of cataract surgery, the value of a multifocal IOL, spectacle independence, we rely on, I would say, very traditional endpoints. And once we start exploring what that patient experience is and the potential benefits of those patients beyond just preliminary visual outcomes, there's a lot of opportunity there. I just can't say enough the shared advocacy. I completely agree with, if we come together, society, surgeons, industry, that shared advocacy will help really disrupt and elicit a lot of positive change for the entire field of ophthalmology.
David, you have the last word.
Yeah, the value needs to translate to the patients.
Yes.
The patients need to see their dollars, their out-of-pocket cost going to something that they construe as a real-life benefit. We can have the best product in the world for patients, and if it costs them more than whatever their pain point is, whether it's $100 or $1,000 or $10,000, my patients are not going to use it at all. And we've been very successful in Retina at helping reduce the out-of-pocket cost for the very expensive drugs in the office setting. As we translate to the operating room with port delivery, gene therapy, will we be able to make that value portable? And we may follow the lead of cataract surgery. You guys have shown us how patients can come out of pocket for things that they construe as a benefit, but we need the patients to see the value.
I don't think we could have had a better panel. I thank all of you here. It's been fantastic. I also like to thank the organizers, and I also like to thank Notel, the company, for opening behind the scenes and about the barriers that they face with their really superior technology. So thank you, everyone. Gil?
Thank you so much, Reg and panel. That was one of the best panels we brought together. Anterior segment, retina, and industry, I think maybe for the first time talking about these barriers, and Reg, if you can bring these people together, can you run for President of the United States? We need someone who can bring things together like this. We're going to the break now, and we really want you to come back at 10 o'clock sharp. We have an amazing session with the founders of Regeneron. We had dinner with these guys last night. This is going to be one of the most animated, interesting stories of their 30-year partnership building an amazing company. So please come back at 10 o'clock. Thank you.